Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday, and welcome to the Restoring Our Roots podcast, the voice of the Decriminalize Nature movement. This podcast is a gathering space where we explore the wisdom of entheogenic plants and fungi, the beauty of natural healing, and the importance of reconnecting to the sacred earth. Twice a month, though we've been a little bit spotty over the summertime, so thanks for sticking with us. We're going to have a pretty amazing show up in the fall and the winter time here, but we'll do this every other Sunday with a variety of visionaries, healers, and advocates who are working with entheogenic plants and fungi, exploring realms of consciousness and returning to a balanced relationship with nature. My name is Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Decriminialize Nature movement and the national organizing director. So I've had the privilege to help people all across the U.S. Basically pitching this to their city council, educating their community, and bringing some good policy to make sure people aren't getting arrested for entheogenic plants and mushrooms. I also like to, if you want to sort of get that going in your own city, please make sure to contact us at decriminializenature.org. You can find some more information in the liner notes on the podcast itself. I'd also like to introduce Rachel, who's been doing a great job helping us out behind the scenes. Thank you, Rachel, for your consistency and being here and every other Sunday or switching up schedules when we need to make things happen. And we have some really nice new graphics as well on our podcast now. So thank you, Rachel, for all that. We'll be putting up some clips before too long. So keep an eye out for those clips. We'll start getting some conversation out there to the rest of the community out there. And I know that we're also we're currently going live on YouTube Live, Rumble, and Odyssey, but we will have in a week this episode and other episodes on Spotify and all the other podcast channels. So go ahead and check us out there. If you're interested in what we're doing, please make sure to donate. We can donate here either on this platform or go to decriminializenature.org. Make sure we can continue having this wonderful podcast. For the live listeners, also keep in mind that there's a chat box. So just go ahead and put any questions you have for myself or Travis as we move along the show. And then Rachel, about 10 minutes before the end of the show, will put together some of those questions for us, and we can go ahead and share those with the community. I'm really excited today to have our guest, Travis Tyler Fluck, who is, kind of, to me, even though he's not an elder, he's an elder to me. He's done so much amazing work in this world. He really inspired us from the Decriminialize Nature Oakland movement. He was one of the co-founders and really big motivators of the Denver ballot initiative that passed in May of 2019, 1 month before Oakland passed in June of 2019. He's also a master mycologist, and I'll say this because I'm, you're in the lab right now, you're doing some amazing work, and I only just hear the most amazing things from your wares and your sort of care for the mushrooms and your knowledge of both how to grow the mushrooms, but also what they're like, what's that inner experience like, the history of them, the community around it, and everything else. So it's just really such an honor to have you here, and I'm so excited for this conversation. Oftentimes when I'm talking to other Decrim Nature teams all around, I sort of point to you as ways to do this in the post-decrim model. How do we do gifting in a good way? How do we bring education to people in a good way? Education is always something that people are like, we need more education. And I always think about you and reference you as a way to really go about this in a good kind of fashion. So thank you for that. Thank you for your inspiration and your motivation. I'm really happy to have you here. We're looking forward to some great conversations. And yeah, it's just such an exciting moment today. So how are you doing today, Travis?
I'm great after that introduction. That was really sweet. Thank you. You know, there's usually a certain way I get introduced into the space, and it's detail oriented, and I feel very honored, really honored to be in this dialogue with you, Larry. The bigger work, that we speak to and apply our life effort to, like it's just been so, yeah, just amazing to have peers in that
Mm.
pursuit. So yeah, I'm great.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a great weekend for us to meet too. We had 920 yesterday, which for folks out there is sort of the started about a decade or maybe a little bit over a decade ago, sort of Magic Mushroom Day or International Mushroom Day, sort of celebrating psilocybin mushrooms, etc. It's also we have the equinox happening on Monday, and Rachel was just telling me earlier there's also an eclipse happening. So it's just a very beautiful time to be having this conversation. A lot of good energy here, so I'm excited about that. For the viewers out there that maybe don't know who you are, why don't you just give a little bio, maybe kind of how you came into this space and kind of share maybe a little bit about your love for mushrooms and other plants.
Oh wow, we could be here for an hour
Yeah.
with
Okay. Well,
but I'm a
podcast done.
casualty of the drug war,
Okay.
and I just was content to kind of exist in the counterculture as kind of like how I was going to rally against or rage against the machine, as the kids say.
Hmm.
And in 2001, I was caught with basically mycelium, and they gave the mycelium, the local police gave the mycelium to an FBI lab person, and it took them 3 weeks to fruit the mycelium. And then they turned around and charged me with attempt to manufacture a controlled substance, which is the same thing that someone would get if they were trying to make meth. Um, and they sensationalized it in the news, and I really became kind of an infamous character in the place that I grew up in, Quakertown, Pennsylvania. And like I said, I was content to kind of exist in that space until my partner at the time was working on the proto version of what became the Denver campaign. And for 2 months, she followed me around and said, "Why aren't you doing this with me? You're like Mr. Mushroom. You know, I can't imagine why this isn't a good idea to you." And it wasn't until someone shared a very powerful testimonial about an ex-husband that had complex PTSD and a terminal condition that really wanted to have a mushroom experience before they transitioned. They shared this story, and I recognized my privilege in that moment and said, "Yeah, fuck that. I'm going to dedicate my life to making sure that never happens again." So at that point, I joined the Denver campaign. And yeah, that was my entry point into the space. Fortunately or unfortunately, some personal tragedy struck right around the same time that we passed the Denver legislation. And it pushed me to relate to the mushroom in a medicinal way. And I started taking very large doses in the neighborhood of 15 grams repeatedly. And that shaped the course and direction of my life from another kind of vector. So between the activism piece and the kind of pursuit of self-realization, working with the medicine, that's really amalgamated into the role that I play in this ever-evolving landscape in the here and now.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I mean, to take your personal story and realize that, you know, this can't be happening to other folks and then actually take action is something I think a lot of people will think about that first part, but don't really have the sort of stick-to-itiveness or the tenacity to really make it happen and push for policy and push for change to happen on the real world level. So really thank you for doing that for everyone out there, especially in Denver, and really kind of starting this whole movement up.
Yeah, well, it's just like that age-old thing, like there's a time and place, right? So I just answered that call,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I think if it wasn't going to be me, someone else would have been there, been tapped in the same, or at least that's the sense I got.
Hmm.
Um, I was one of the first 4 people with petitions in their hand, and that day, that afternoon that I walked into my house, something came over me and said, "If you give this everything, this is possible."
Hmm.
So I just never said if, I always said when.
Hmm.
And somehow that kindled a bigger thing. And even though we passed by 0.5%, the echoes of what we did are still, being heard today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that if and when thing is so important. We kind of had a little bit of the same strategy here in Oakland, which was like, oh, here we're going to throw out some sort of, you know, arbitrary dates for having these sort of, you know, goalposts for when we're trying to pass. Now you went through like a ballot initiative process, which is more signature gathering, which I imagine is pretty challenging. We were going through the city council, which also with bureaucratic delays, you never know on dates, but still that same mindset. We're going to do this at this time, not if this happens. It's like this is going to happen here, it's going to happen here. And I think just coming into that with that mindset, you know, as they say what McKenna's nature loves courage. You know, you come in there, you say this is what's going to happen, and make change happen, and it does happen that way. So tell us a little bit about both that and also you know, what's the process a little differently for gathering signatures? You have to talk to more people really and educate more people in that process. How was the response there in Denver?
Well, you got to remember that when we were collecting signatures, no one wanted to put their name on a piece of paper that also said psilocybin for
Right.
fear of ending up on a list.
Hmm.
But just as an interesting perspective, 18 months later, when they went to Washington, D.C. and did the same thing, ran a campaign, instead of 0.5% of a win, it was like 76% yes.
Right.
It was like, it's just amazing to see the cultural conversation shift so quickly that an East Coast city could do it and make it a mandate in that way.
The capital of the US, no less, right?
Yeah. So, our experience collecting signatures was very interesting because a lot of people that were like a hell yes, couldn't sign because they didn't live in Denver City and County.
Mm.
Right. So we had to like give them jobs as well. So usually the thing I would say to somebody that couldn't sign because of their location is said, well, your homework is to find two people that do live in Denver and convince them to find us to sign or to vote yes when it appears on the ballot. You know, everybody had a job. It wasn't like they lost out on the ability to participate in this thing. And I was quick to remind people that if we pass in Denver, that means when you come into Denver, you are entreated to the same thing. You don't have to be a citizen of Denver just to have access to decriminalization.
Hmm.
And I really tried to leverage every possible person that I could in country and out of country to put pressure in the nicest way possible on this situation. And when the numbers came back and the difference of votes was 1,979 votes, it was very evident that every little touch point mattered,
Hmm.
and that was really beautiful. And I don't know how much of that story actually found its way into the zeitgeist, because like it was really a team effort, and there was a lot of, I would say, mysticism involved or woven into our campaign, which is like kind of like that speaking into existence part,
Hmm.
you know. And yeah, it was it's so interesting because it's been about 7 years now since I got my petition and I was out in the world doing this. And we were doing this into the winter and collecting signatures in like 10-degree weather. And we had pens that were like in between our belt line and our body to keep them warm enough so the ink would flow. And yeah, it was really wild. And we pre-validated our signatures before we turned them in, so we knew we were going to get on the ballot a month before Denver elections had their say.
Mm.
And speaking to Denver elections multiple times, they really assured me that they weren't looking to disenfranchise anyone, that they were looking for reasons to include signatures, which I don't think is the trend nationwide.
Hmm.
And they validated at a higher percentage than we even did, which is pretty wild.
Oh.
And the media was definitely making fun of us every step of the way. And even that night that the votes, the first night that the votes looked like we lost, that morning, the media was saying things like, haha, Denver, better luck next time. But then again, y'all tried to have a ballot initiative in 2015 to create parking spaces for UFOs. So we were just like, the laughing stock until we weren't. Until 4:20 that afternoon,
Right.
Denver elections released final standings and we had passed, which was wild because then that night I was on the phone with the New York Times, Rolling Stone, like nothing would ever be the same.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Wild.
mean, yeah, I mean, I remember watching that whole process because we passed a month after you did, and we were utilizing, oh, Denver, already Denver's going to pass. This is why we should do this, and then okay, how do we rethink how we now go back? Because it's the same thing, see the numbers at night, you're like, oh man, the next morning, all the news was like all excited to jump all over you, right? And I'm sure that process for you all that time and energy and painstaking nuance preparation and making sure everyone's getting on board, that must have been kind of heart-wrenching for a minute there. And then the elation that must have come conveniently at 420, how beautiful when you found out that you did pass. Kind of take us through that little experience
Oh,
for
geez. So I was getting every possible sign from creation that this was going to happen.
me. Mm.
And then the night when the votes came back, I was in an existential dilemma. I was like, I was just like, wow, I was so, my whole night was derealized.
Mm.
And what nobody knew is that there were still 45,000 uncounted votes, that it was the largest turnout in Denver elections history in a non-presidential year, and 180,000 people came out to vote. And that same year, we were on the ballot with an initiative to create a camping ban, which is essentially a move to get rid of the homeless. And 86% of voters voted to get rid of the homeless. It's pretty wild to be on the ballot. So I like was just like there's actually footage of me speaking that night, and I was completely not in my body, and I was just like, this isn't how this is supposed to go down, you know? And the next afternoon, we were at a lunch table with some of the folks from Decrim, California, and they were just saying, well, you know, these things hardly ever pass on your first attempt, so we just got to look at what's next. And I was sitting there, and I was sitting next to a reporter, and I was like, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's the spring. It just rained for 3 days in a row. Like, what happens after 3 days of rain in the spring? Mushrooms, you know, like. And I think I told the reporter I was viciously optimistic. So he wrote the article that we won. So he was ready at 4:20. He was actually. Do you know who Riley Capps is? Do you know
Yeah,
that name?
yeah,
Yeah. So Riley was the first person to enter that we won into the media, because he was sitting there next to me, and we were convinced it was still going to happen. And then in that moment, I also realized that they released the numbers to us in waves. So the very first wave of numbers that were coming back were all the conservative early voters. And
Mhm.
then each concentric wave, which was happening about an hour and a half later, was like adjusting the percentage. And then I realized that I should probably sit down and watch the math and see if there's a trend.
Mhm.
And sure as shit, the math said, even if the trend didn't continue, even if it just stayed static, that we still won. So at 3:45, I looked up from my piece of paper, and I'm like, we won. At least by the numbers, we won. So I called Kevin, and I was like, the numbers said we won. And in the middle of our phone call, while I was assuring him that we had passed, then Denver elections broke in and gave us the actual information. So it was really wild to kind of go through my doubt process. And then on the other side, like, if I would have just maintained the faith in the process, then, you know, like, that wouldn't have been such a big surprise.
Mhm.
But I went through this big thing to kind of, embolden me in a way. Like, look at me doubting something that for months was just continually, like, revealed to me that this is how it was going to go down. So it really let me mature into my intuition a lot more, the whole process.
Yeah, I'm sure, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of folks, as you probably know, and probably are maybe less excited about nowadays, is hearing some of the deep pockets out there who are so easy to say, well, the polling says blah blah blah. And like you say, that doesn't speak to intuition and belief and like the knowledge of like, oh, we haven't educated folks yet, because the same folks that were talking about polling with you all told us all you can do is mushrooms. You can't decriminalize nature because the polling people don't know what ayahuasca is or ibogaine is or cacti are. They're just not going to go for it, right? And we're like, the polling doesn't show, like, it shows the past. It doesn't show our current moment when we're doing the active education to folks. So
Yeah,
I
but
imagine in the process you're hearing all this stuff coming from all these directions, but in your heart there's a different sense coming through.
well, I wasn't polled when they say we
Right.
did a poll. Were you polled?
Nope, no, not at all. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Right. I that's such a hard art, and that's one of the things that was so tricky with our statewide thing, is like they kept holding up the polls. The polls say we're good, so it doesn't matter what you say. We're not going to slow this down. We're not going to relationship build. We're going to do this
Hmm.
because the time is nigh and our narrative prevails. So that was really tough,
Hmm.
to go from really feeling like we could lead the charge as a vanguard, and then being suppressed in that way and told that we weren't, that we somebody else can take it from here.
Hmm. Right.
Like, y'all have been the pioneer species here, and that's great, but we're gonna collect the fruit, you
Hmm.
know.
Hmm.
And so yeah, the political process is just something I'm just like, I understand that it exists, and I understand there's a language and a way to, negotiate in it, but I can't fully embody it. I can't live in that world with
Hmm.
both feet.
Right. And so take us maybe through, okay, so you passed in Denver 2019, 2022 comes around, new ballot initiative. There's some ins and outs. I always love this story too because
So
The ballot initiative passed, and then I remember right after, right, the legislators went really hard to try and remove all the things that were voted on. And I always like, I even spoke to this last night at the 920 event about you all kind of came together. Also, they had their meeting on 420, and everyone in the community came out. It was like 80 something people, and it was like, you know what, a 100-page document or 80-page document or something like that. And you
Yeah.
all showed up to protect your rights. And so that also just shows the strength of the local community there to say, hey, wait a second, this is what we voted on. How are you trying to strip this away from us? So maybe take us through then the state level ballot initiative. And then also, from what I understand, did Denver's then get repealed? And why did it get repealed? Maybe
Oh
that as well.
gosh. Um, so there's only 26 states in the country where people can really have as much sway because they can start a ballot initiative process because they can say, well, if the lawmakers aren't going to do it, then we're going to do it.
Mhm.
And and what that does is balance the power a little more. So when they were creating the implementation bill, and it was difficult for the lawmakers because typically when an initiative is run, it tells you all the things you can't do. But the way 122 is written, it said all the things you could do. So they had to like reverse it. And it was really important that the spirit of the law was implemented as well, because that was such like, it was such a hard win to even get those concessions. The first thing we wanted from New Approach was please slow down. Let's hang out for 2 years and actually come out with policy that's equitable, because we really believe that if you just legalize this, that it's going to eclipse out the ability to decriminalize. And they told us that they did not believe that an initiative would pass with any sort of decriminalization. So our number two request was that we have no limit decrim as part of this, and that was even a hard sell. The language that came out of that was that somebody's allowed to have a necessary amount to share, right? Which is completely subject to policing, as we've
Right,
seen now.
right. Thank you for asking. Thank you for letting us have the privilege to be able to grow our own mushrooms, right?
Oh God.
Please show us how.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. So, all of those were it was such a hard fight that we went into it, you know, galvanized as much as the movement in Colorado has ever been that day. I think that's it. To kind of speak to that. And what you probably appreciate too is that all the while that they're passing these legalization measures, like all of the testimonial to do this have been done in the decrim or the space where people are willing to risk felony prosecution to have this.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? So why aren't we preserving this along the way? And then the president of the Senate was actually on our side.
Hmm.
We met with him after one of his town halls because we kind of took it over, and he said, I have to share this with you so that you guys appreciate this. Is like, if you guys wouldn't have done this year, or if this wouldn't have passed, I was going to introduce legislation for therapy access the next year. And when I was in college, I used to sell mushrooms, and my nickname was Mushroom Steve. And I was like, oh my God, what are the chances here? And I even had a really big experience with the mushroom, that part of it, they told me that, like, don't worry, this guy's in on it. He's like one of us, which didn't soften my resolve. But yeah, we were just really at the time, the the unspoken or spoken sentiment is like we have the right to heal,
Hmm.
and the groups that are typically affluent housewives with a lot of resources and time on their hands to beg legislators were our pushback. So the whole meeting of 150 people testifying was all started off by three people that have died in proximity to mushroom experiences. So it was just it's a really powerful moment,
Hmm.
and then they really, other than the iboga part and the paid advertisement part, we got everything we wanted. The 122 is phrased that we weren't allowed in the decrim space to advertise if it was paid advertisement, you know, and then they changed it to advertisement, which is still very vague because advertising in its simplest elemental form is I tell you something, right? And then the other thing is they would not allow us to share iboga.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, we got everything,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
pretty wild. So then it's really been up to us to treat this as the newborn situation it is, and not provoke the legislators to create more clarification, to create more like black and white areas of the law, because most of the time they're content in making problems before problems exist,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so one of the coolest things that came out of the implementation is we wound up being able to cultivate in a 12-foot by 12-foot space. No ceiling was ever
Really?
entered into that. Could dose the entire state with like 6 of those rooms. I'm pretty convinced. I'm pretty convinced. But that's been one of the problems for getting the regulated space off the ground is, like at least here in Colorado, it's like, why would you pay $3,400 to do this when you could go to the decrim space and do it for free or
Right.
whatever. But yeah, a lot of my world has been nucleated around the recognition that this is such a newborn thing, and we need to prove to the rest of everybody looking at doing this that we can benefit in ways that can't even be forecasted,
Mm-hmm.
in the initial kind of horizon that we're looking at through the lens of medicalized, like the way we perceive things is very medicalized, even though we don't take time to often assess that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said something earlier about new approach pack being against decrim, and I didn't know they were also giving you pushback because between decrim nature movement on these cities and the statewide, movement in Colorado for decrim, that's really the only viable, legitimate strategy for policy right now. You look at the Oregon model, it's way too expensive. You look at the legalization framework in Colorado, it's way too expensive. But I didn't know they were telling you even back then that decrim wasn't viable, trying to push you out because now you're showing everybody, whereas they were able to repeal the decrim in Oregon through this all substance thing, you all are like, no, actually this decrim works. And it's the only statewide policy currently that's working effectively is the decrim in Colorado. So to hear them have said that, because that's what they were using in Massachusetts, when Massachusetts bill failed, they said, here's proof that decrim isn't viable. And it's like, how can you say that when literally every place that's successful right now is a decrim model and every place that's legalization regulatory framework is not successful?
Well,
So
it's because we don't have a platform like Maps conference to like really amplify
right.
this thing. It's so cost effective. These medicines are so cost effective. I don't know why we aren't celebrating that. I mean, I can tell you why I think that, but yeah, I mean that's a great segue into like my Maps experience.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, it was great seeing you out there, by the way.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna pay to get in to the conference because I felt like, I pull this card once in a while. I felt like for all the work I've done for the movement that I shouldn't have to pay to get in.
Right, VIP treatment. Where's that red carpet, right?
I don't even need VIP treatment. I just need some acknowledgement that if you have a massive conference literally 10 minutes away from the house where I held the volunteer meetings to do the damn thing, like, I don't know. It was
Yeah.
like, it's like, it's actually really good for my perspective taking around erasure, around culture erasure. So I was seeing myself like erased, but it allowed me to have a lot more compassion for the greater ethnic erasure that's happening around these medicines.
Mhm.
And I bitched to the high ups and finally got in, and that's how I got in. But I applied to speak and they wouldn't let me speak because I really wanted to sing for my supper. I didn't just want to like come in, I wanted to like represent Colorado because there's some really cool shit happening here.
Mhm.
And not that I expected to leave there completely satisfied with the state of affairs. They did a little bit better, in my opinion, this time around than 2 years ago. Um, just as far as like a little more focus around the origins and wisdom traditions that
Yeah.
come along with these medicines, you know.
And that swept away the
Um,
pharmaceutical, it sounds like 2 years ago, is a pharma conference more so, huh?
well, it was different because Oregon hadn't shown that it wasn't going to do the thing. There
Hmm.
was all this excitement because Oregon's like, yeah, first year everybody's going to get 90,000 treatments, I think is the number they floated around.
Oh.
So everybody was just so excited, and I was walking around that place. It felt like a casino.
Mm.
That there was just all this excitement and who's going to hit big, and because cannabis showed us that we can create billionaires out of prohibition 2.0 scenarios.
Mhm.
So I think that's where everybody was, and everybody's like excited, that like 40 years of Prozac and talk therapy doesn't do what this does, you know. Um, but the second time around was a more of a reality check
Mhm.
that this is actual. If you take away a lot of the what do they call that in the speculation, when you take away the speculation and you get down to the reality of the situation, this is more honest of what it looks like, and if you take away a lot of the embellishment around the sexiness of healing, this is what it looks like, or at least we're approaching what this looks like. And fortunately, and you can speak to this, like spaces like the Detroit conference exist,
Mhm.
so that you can really experience what a medicine centered conference can be like.
Yep.
It's like visceral,
Mhm.
beyond this like this empty sort of excitement for something that hasn't actually proven itself yet, you
Mhm.
know? Um,
And
so
and it feels like in those spaces, you look around, and whereas maybe this sort of speculative casino model, you might have some opportunists, and you don't feel like like the Detroit conference is raw. It's like everyone there
you,
is gone deep and
you
explored.
can't
If they haven't,
bullshit.
yeah, exactly, exactly,
You
yeah.
can't bullshit. I got tapped to give a talk at that conference that I've given to other audiences before that weren't initiated in the same way.
Hmm.
So people, my audiences, a lot of times have to willingly suspend their disbelief so that they can follow along with where I'm going. And it was really a big initiation for me to give that talk in that room, because when I was talking about spending time with Jesus and Buddha in a mushroom vision, and I made eye contact with the room, they're like, right? It wasn't such like I didn't have to like wait for the room to gasp. Everybody was with me,
Right, right,
you
yeah,
know, and that was really really important,
yeah,
and my wish, my hope is that those type of spaces continue to bring people in from these other bigger, more mainstream spaces, so that they can really feel the difference.
yeah. Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, so yeah, my maps conference, I kind of tagged along with everybody. That's how I had my experience. I wasn't necessarily like super pumped to see anybody than like Dennis McKenna and let's see, Hamilton Morris. I wanted to see speak, and Paul Stamets. I wanted to see what he had to say, if he was going to like, because he reiterates a lot of the same stuff. And then it's interesting. I actually had to choose between Hamilton, Dennis, and Leonard Picard. They were on at the same time, and I chose Leonard Picard. But I left the conference feeling like I hadn't seen myself
Hmm.
represented in that space,
Hmm.
because there's so much money and resources pointed at two things: the research, which profiles populations so heavily, like how can anybody see themselves truly in the studies, and the philosophy of helping people,
Hmm.
right? And I'm out here literally helping people for pennies on the dollar, but we aren't talking about that. And
Right.
I just,
And
um,
the only policy model that was out there was just legalization regulation. I don't think did they have anything decrim oriented? If it was like a little pretend
like
thing
a
that,
footnote,
yeah.
like a footnote, there's a story I tell a lot about. I gave this blind woman 2 grams, and she ate one of the grams and saw images in her brain for the first time.
Hmm.
And the cost of consumables to produce that, to gift that to her, was 21 cents. I was like, what more do we want?
Right.
What more do
Right.
we want? Right? It's there. The mushrooms once told me, they said, look, As long as cows poop, y'all are going to have mushrooms.
Yeah.
This isn't a scarcity thing, so don't make it one.
Right.
So yeah, I left maps like kind of figuring out where do I want to, like recalibrate? Where do I want to where's the niche for me to kind of exist? Because when maps comes back in 2 years, I want to be ready. I want to be ready. So one of
Mhm.
the biggest ideas that came out of that was like, I think it'd be so cool to travel to all of these places that have decriminalized and see what's going on,
Mhm.
what's working, what's not.
Mhm.
Has anything interesting have any interesting anthropomorphic structures emerged,
Mhm.
because I think there's so much storytelling that has now accumulated in the
Mhm.
last 6 years,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you can speak to this from where you're at. We share ground zero, in a
Right.
way.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean,
um
I think there's somebody said there's probably close to 10,000 new people growing mushrooms in the Oakland area right now that have never grown. And then you got to figure each of those folks are probably sharing it with their friends, So
Wonderful.
the amount of experiences that are happening right now are exponentially higher. I saw what you probably saw this that CNN article that came out a little while ago, and it was like unsupervised use of mushrooms increases dramatically over the last 6 years. And I'm like, woo, all right, great.
Yeah, well, they took an edge with that because I think the Rocky Mountain something said that like talking about a lot of misinformation around ER visits. I think it was that same article.
Yeah, they were talking about poison control, but poison control doesn't mean ER, what do you call it, intakes.
Well, we're
So
talking
if
about
you
the
take
same thing.
if we're talking about the numbers, it was like 0.0025% because 8 million people supposedly had an experience, and they're talking about 1,000 or 2,000 poison control calls or something like that,
Well,
which
the
is pretty
information was
small.
not factual because the governor's office, because I'm tight with the governor's office through all this, and they were like, we need to figure this out because they're just talking shit.
Oh, really? Okay, so those numbers weren't even real, huh? Wow.
No, the number go back into the article if you have a moment and be like, oh no, that's way crazy,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? Um, but yeah, so I just feel like if the world's going to look at Denver, that next year it'd be really cool the day before the conference when everybody still has their wits about them to really put on a showcase or
Mm-hmm.
bring people into that world,
Right.
you know? What does that look like? What does it look like to decommodify this? And what do the stories look like of like when we have invested relationships instead of transactional ones?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's just been one of the things I've been kind of mulling over is how can that look? Because I think if I'm going to go or we're going to go and visit all these places, we also need some scaffolding to drape this storytelling. So I've been thinking about like what does an online portal look like that guides people through these adjacent things, merging the science and the on the ground intel and the personal testimonial and all the different medical conditions that people are working with mushrooms around, and I think there's a chat bot that somehow works with this, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was talking to Aize out here who did Table of Their Own. And he says that he's got some tech knowledge and kind of same thing. Like, how do we? There's all these people doing science right now, and then there's the FDA, and the FDA only funds the things that's going to make them more money back. But what about all the science that people are doing? We can't just throw that away or call it anecdotal. So how do we organize it in such a way, whether it's a database like Arrowwood had or other things like that, where we can start sharing information, and then you increase the science, exponentially, and because it's now comparable between different sort of data sets, it's hard to like sort of sort of dismiss from the scientific sort of model, not to mention the fact that how many times have we heard like, oh, we're afraid decrim is going to mess up our FDA trials, and then at the end of the day we look at the FDA trials and it turns out that it was bad science that's kind of kind of inhibiting some of the policy that's going on right now. And you see just recently, I don't know if you saw the MAPS FDA transparency document. Maps was spending a lot of their time, pointing their fingers at Symposia, being like, Symposia really blew it for us. And then you look at the actual data, sort of transparency, and they're like, well, actually, it was this 5 elements of science that needed to be adjusted accordingly. That could have maybe helped you out in the long run. So,
but but do you see how much like static and this what do they call it, the opposite of fidelity is distortion. There's just so much distortion in that world, and I'm like, why don't we just wield this thing with so much integrity that it can't follow us?
mm-hmm. Right.
and that's why I think that blockchain, we have all this really cool technology that people have been, wielding in these kind of speculative and self-interested ways. Why don't we like bring it back around and show how these things can really like help us?
Hmm.
And because all of these things are nature expressing itself, you
Mm.
know.
Right.
So I just think a lot about what does a living matricy look like, and what is the user experience like. I have MS, right? And I sit down at my computer and I say, like this is a little bit about me, and all of a sudden it starts showing you possible pathways you can take through this undifferentiated plenum of information.
Hmm.
Like it gives you the choice instead of like feeding you bias. And
Right.
that's one of the things is most of these portals that we look at now that someone has our attention, then they take our attention where they want it to go. And what does it look like if somebody's self-guided and wants to go through this information?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think there's a lot to be doing there. I definitely would love to work with you on the Denver project, but also obviously the tour project and checking out what's going on everywhere else and figuring out how to organize information and science in a good way from the grassroots. I think that's so important. Um, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think right now the biggest thing is just to like go and check in with everybody.
Hmm.
Like this thing is now a toddler,
Yeah,
and like and I just think it'd be so cool to go back into what we've done here and kind of see what we've done,
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
because I think there's enough meat to really do something with, and I think that's where it starts. It's just like breathing the same air, eating the same food, like just being in the same space.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's so important. I even just think about that. Even, the one benefit and probably what really drove me to go to the Psychedelic Science 25 conference, because I was kind of also like you, like, I don't know about this, right? But it was to see you in person. It was to see other people in person. It was to see people behind the screen, in three-dimensional form, and be able to hang out and touch and connect and have conversations and all that kind of thing. So those are what those meeting points are great for.
Yeah, like
But actually be able to do that in all these different cities again and kind of do like this sort of nationwide tour, and then also hit up all the cities where they need a little something, like doing events. Even last night, the 920 event in a place where San Francisco was already decrimmed. So many people came out of there inspired and motivated. And how can we help? And what can we do? There's something about that sort of in the moment presence, that doing the event, hearing voices that you haven't heard before, having conversations that sort of, really kind of light you up. There's something about that you just can't replace with educational forums, or online things, or an authority figure telling you what to do, what have you.
well, it's the same old shit.
Right,
You know
right,
what I mean? Like it tastes different,
right. Yeah,
and
exactly.
that, but like it's almost like a peak experience
Hmm.
is to have that satsang, I guess is the word there, and
Hmm.
then what do you do with that if you go back to a place that isn't sympathetic to that vibration that you just brought in from these happenings,
Right.
um, and that's one of the things I'm excited for in Colorado is like we can actually start to build out sympathetic networks, so the accountability and paths to eldership can kind of come out of this, because like the systems that we live in and depend on are not meeting our needs.
Hmm. Hmm.
And more I'm pushed to define myself more in the mutual aid space than the psychedelic space,
Hmm.
because it's way too muddy.
Right,
It's way too muddy.
right. Yeah, this is awesome. So I don't want to, we have about 20 minutes left, and I enjoy talking about philosophy, but I really want to talk about some of the other things like peak experience, about your sort of cultivator knowledge. Where do you want to go first? We could talk about a little bit about cultivation and then go in kind of some of your bigger experiences that you're having, if you're open to sharing any of that.
Yeah.
But
So
go ahead.
uh, a lot of my my recent work with the mushroom has taken me outside of this paradigm that the mushroom is nothing but a medicine.
Hmm.
The mushroom once said to me, y'all talk about us when you say we're a medicine, you're pretty much pigeonholing us. It's almost if you were a fireman and everyone only ever said to you about your firemanness, and you're like, no, but I'm a painter, and I love to cook. And they're like, no, 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 you're a fireman.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there's this multidimensionality of this organism, this being, that we are doing the same thing, even in the subtle ways. We're doing the same. We're othering it
Mm-hmm.
instead of bringing it into a bigger reunion with nature, kind of experience that we could be having. Because I believe that these medicines really have the truest form of compassion towards us. That they recognize that we are in a phase of amnesia and need to be reminded of what we actually are. And they each have their own touch in how they do that. And in the beginning, um, I'll say the beginning of my intentional work with the mushroom, a lot of my big experiences that were in between, like 10 and 15 grams, were taking esoteric information that I had studied for years and directly installing it in me.
Mm-hmm.
Because often, I'm often talking to people about their big experiences and the things they experience, and the ways that the mushroom kind of, creates the environment for them to have these insights. And they're not always producing the same results as the experience I'm having. So I reflected on, well, I wonder if we can appreciate each of our circumstances as a substrate, that the mushroom is actually able to go in and, create these connections and these things with the, I'll use the word again, substrate of our experience. And recently, in the last year and a half, there's been these much bigger recalibrations to the innate wisdom of the universe, and how I get to, express that through my biological vessel. I had a really big experience about 2 years ago where the land spoke directly to me and said, just so that you know, that if the land is not involved in y'all's healing, that there's no actual healing taking place, which is a pretty big one. And then the thing it said to follow up that, it said, look, your human-centric models around healing are completely pathetic, which I thought was an interesting word choice. And as I was kind of reeling from the paradigm shattering nature of those statements, the land said to me, look, all you need to do is bring people to the land, give them the medicine, and get the fuck out of the way. And it really repositioned me in how I see myself in all of this, and that the land is the master space holder here,
Mm-hmm.
and really inspiring me to redefine what all these words mean. So, you know, um, over the course of the last 6 years, I've had 51 intentional high doses, right? And there's still stuff to be cooked. So when I look at the regulation charging people $3,000 to have these experiences, like, I wouldn't have been able to have afforded 51 experiences at $3,000 each.
And not at
But
that, not at that amount either, right? So you'd have had a smaller dose too.
right, but being in relationship to this organism is a birthright,
Yeah.
right? So I recently thought about like this thing. If everybody all of a sudden decided tomorrow that they wanted to eat like well and eat organic, there isn't enough food for them to eat. And if everybody decided tomorrow that they want to start working on themselves, with the mushroom and processing this trauma, like, there isn't enough access. And I think that the only way that we really digest the amount of collective trauma that we have is if we teach people in an interpersonal way how to work with be in relation to these medicines. So yeah, a lot of my work, my inner work lately has been kind of informing the way that hopefully I can show up with wisdom instead of enabling.
Mhm. What is your sense of we talk a lot about sort of this out of body or multidimensional realm experiences, but also the in some other, side of it is the in body, or you're planted in the earth. And almost in a way, there's, for me, sometimes it's like you press your elbow to go somewhere, it's in body, out of body. Like, what's your sense of like where these spaces are that you're going to? It sounds like you have some pretty profound experiences in terms of even some deities and entities.
Well, it's not a question of where, because that's a phenomenon of the 3D reality,
Sure, right,
right?
right.
So I think they coexist, right? They're
Mhm.
just like right now your awareness is just focused in a certain place. So oftentimes what it allows you is to focus your awareness somewhere else, and we can only use words of the 3D to describe what that even means.
Mhm.
We're so limited if we want to communicate direct experience to someone else by this. It's like it's actually more the work of the poet than the research scientist, and when we take away words or concepts and we exist in the truth of it, then it's the here and now.
Mhm.
It's just the here and now. It just happens to be the aperture is a lot wider for your experience than the story that you came into um, this lifetime with.
Mhm.
So I like my body's in my bed for
Mhm.
the most part, somewhere safe, um, but my awareness is somewhere else.
Mhm.
And um, what I learned with or without a blindfold, that if you just close your eyes, you can experience the universe that is within. Conceptually, when we try and think of how big the universe is, outside of us, like as above, so below, it's equally as expansive inside.
Mhm.
But nobody's given the lantern to explore that cave in the Western model of reality.
Right, right, right. Yeah, and definitely having I often think about when we think about the word infinity, we always have to have a starting point, which is us measuring infinity. But if you
Yeah,
talk about what you're talking about, if we're just like the sort of the zoom mechanism, our consciousness is inward and outward. Now you
yeah.
have infinity where awareness is the 0 point, but it doesn't really stop it as a starting point. It's just the 0 point for infinity in and infinity out. And so I really like to think about that too. Like, why are we wasting all our money going to try and find UFOs out there when there's like all these beings inside of us and other realities and other sort of dimensional sort of conversations we could be having, and that all exists
Well,
right in here, right?
systemic oppression is the
Sure.
simple way to answer that.
Right, right.
You
Yeah.
know, I know we had somebody said we have 10 minutes left. I want to honor that.
Yeah, yeah, totally. No, I mean, we can continue on. We got some time yet. We'll do a question in a second. I just want to touch on one last thing before we jump to
Okay.
it. Is that also your master cultivar? You're learned all these wonderful techniques. What is the process for folks out there that are maybe interested or thinking about cultivation? Are there any sort of, real basic tips, but also just on the real sort of almost like even as you were saying earlier, esoteric knowledge, learning to watch these mushrooms grow, seeing how they grow, seeing their personalities as they pop up.
Oh,
What is the
geez.
process like for you? What is the relationship building that comes with the cultivation that you're doing and that other folks can also be doing?
So there is just as much medicine in relating to the fungus as you're growing it than there is as consuming it.
Hmm.
And every morning, I'm meditating with my mushrooms for at least 45 minutes,
Hmm.
getting very quiet, and they work in the subtle. Like when you come into my space, you can just
Hmm.
feel it. Um, but I had a very pivotal moment years ago because I was trying to grow the mushroom in such a way that I got as many mushrooms as possible for as little financial input as possible. The way that I like to say it is I was trying to pimp the mushroom.
Hmm.
And then after a few big experiences, I went to the mycelium and I was like, you obviously know way more than I do. Why don't you show me how to grow you? And that completely changed my relationship to the mushroom. It was like was able to allow it to be whatever it wanted, and it could show me through a language of morphology, through just observing it, what it liked, what it didn't like, and it entrained me how to grow it. So, the number one thing I would tell people is just appreciate that this thing has a high magnitude of intelligence
Mm-hmm.
and can teach you in every form that it takes, whether you consume it, whether you just grow it, and that the organism will respond to you as you grow it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, think about the example of like taking the same puppy and putting it in 5 different households. 10 years later, you're going to have 5 different dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So this mycelium is no different. And I've, in the beginning of when I was like kind of like feeling out my intuitive relationship with it, I would say things to it and then it would respond. One of my apprentices grew a giant mushroom and it broke Reddit. It had like 80,000 hits. And I went to the mycelium and I was like, kind of like bummed. And I was like, I want a big mushroom. And I shit you not, 2 weeks later, it's a gigantic mushroom. Like all you had to do is ask. um, but yeah, really just opening up your perception of what this thing is and what it is not.
Mm-hmm.
And um, allow it to not like I don't want to tell people what to do, but one of the biggest insights I had into my process was to stop othering it.
Mm-hmm.
Because how do we treat things that we other? We're very like we we try and wield our agendas onto them, and if you just let it be what it wants to be, it can teach you something about allowing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I can get into the nuts and bolts of like all the lab stuff, but that's not the bigger philosophy is more important that you articulate for yourself. Like, what is your intention here?
Mm-hmm.
Just like we go into a medicine experience with an intention, like I grow with an intention. And historically it's been the word illumination.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a peak experience with these psilocybe cyanescens a few weeks ago. And they told me, they encouraged me to streamline all of my agendas and all of my intentionality and everything into love.
Mm-hmm.
So more recently, I've just been really trying to infuse that intention into my growing.
And I imagine that's such a powerful experience for each individual because now you can sort of cultivate your mushroom. It's
Yeah,
like, if you're, you have set up a really beautiful scenario that I'm sure works for a lot of folks, but for each individual, you can actually build that relationship. Maybe that person's a little more funny or a little more rigid or a little more whatever, and the mushrooms learns that from that individual. And then there's this back and forth that can happen. And then these experiences, it seems like can also sort of tap into that and really sort of be almost unique for that individual, unique medicine for that individual through the cultivation process.
yeah,
So I really like that idea of intention and meditation. And you hear that back in the day with cannabis as well, a lot of singing the cannabis, that type of thing. But taking that over to mushrooms, which I think has even a higher and more sort of intimate relationship
same,
with the
same, same thing.
yeah. Hmm.
Like that's where the seed for that really was planted. I was a cannabis grower, and I've been growing for years. And I got laid up I had to have my feet rebuilt, and my wife at the time had to take care of the plants. And even though she had no experience, she grew far superior cannabis to me. And after we thought about it enough, we realized that every time I went into that room and I looked at those plants, I thought money. And
Mm.
every time she went into that room, she was singing to him and loving on him. So I was growing money, she was growing medicine. So it was very clear.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I mean, such a beautiful thing to think about, especially with that. And then also you work a lot with freeze drying, and versus sort of regular drying. And I think just in terms of how and we're not looking at these as the aesthetic, but something about this sort of full mushroom that's ready to go, but in all of its glory, right post picking it. Maybe tell about that process a little bit as well, or sort of the advantages of doing that.
So Acacia brought it to my attention that because she researched indigenous use around the world that nobody consumes the dried mushroom. And
Hmm.
then she spent time with Tom Lane, and he, exposed her to the Aztec ritual, and where they take fresh mushrooms dipped in a specific honey and then chew the mushroom slowly without actually swallowing the mushroom flesh. And freeze drying, according to the doomsday preppers, will keep food vital for 25 years because
Wow.
of the way that it removes water without adding heat. So a friend of mine was freeze drying because the mushrooms were easier to extract. This was 6 years ago, and I decided to get a freeze dryer and start working with the mushroom freeze dried. And I realized after my very first dose that I had just met the whole mushroom for the very first time.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I realized how amputated the medicine was when we dehydrate it. That
Hmm.
sure, it has all of its core things, but it loses its finesse. And
Hmm.
later on, the mushroom shared with me, look, if you take isolated psilocybin, it's like playing a little kid's keyboard. Sure, you can pick the melody and whatnot, but when you take the whole mushroom, it's like having a cosmic orchestra.
Hmm.
And it just really like it was the metaphor I needed to really see that, that these we can reduce these plants to their heavy lifting molecules, but we miss out on the opportunity for that organism to truly communicate to our biology that we've co-evolved with forever since time memorial. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm super into the freeze drying world.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So important to think about that too. Is like we come up with these ways to process and and to move forward and to save for long term, but just like having that raw mushroom or having a freeze dried approach, and really what does that mean in terms of our interaction, our relationship with the full body there, I think is just a really beautiful thing to sort of wrap this all up on, before we go into the question here, because I think that's something we can all really kind of think about, and I'll think about as well. I have there's some outdoor mushrooms around me, and I'm waiting for that first 40-degree rain, and they just pop up. All these azarescens are popping up in some wood chip piles nearby, and so to really kind of think about that, just like rather than drying them, actually just sort of eating them as they come forward.
Yeah, or I could drive out with my freeze dryer.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, okay, yeah, and those are a little bit pricey in terms of freeze drying, but worth it, I guess, huh?
Well, I have three of them now, but my first one I traded an Army Ranger for a bunch of mushrooms. It's like the universe conspired to like make that happen. And
Yeah.
and I just watch how um how intelligent and vital and just amazing the medicine is when it's freeze dried.
Hmm.
One of the things I love to do is gift people freeze dried mushrooms when they've only ever had the dehydrated, and then they just yeah have these experiences that crack them wide open. Did you? I shared some of the freeze
You did.
dried
You
Shivas
did.
with
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I haven't had a chance yet, but I will be soon enough. So I'm excited for that as the summer winds down and the fall comes up.
yeah. But I would love to coordinate to bring my freeze dryer out and do that because cyanescens are out there and alienize and all kinds of mushrooms this
Yeah,
time of year for you guys.
yeah. Yeah, and these are from my mycelial patch that someone sent me from, that I grabbed from someone in Montana, brought down. I wasn't so sure if they were going to grow here, but as soon as you get that 40-degree rain, that's when they. It's amazing how it also gets triggered by cold and all that. But we could probably talk for another 7 hours or 10 hours, something like that. But I do want to be sort of conscious of time for everybody here. I know Rachel has a question, so we'll go ahead and do that, and then we can kind of wrap it up and ask any final thoughts you have.
Cool.
Amazing. That was a wonderful conversation. I was so into it. We have about 8 viewers live. Just some nice commentary about the whole idea of not just typecasting the mushroom as strictly medicine or something that you're just using for healing, but there's this more conversation about their relationship to us as human beings and to the planet and all that good stuff. But my question's a little bit more meta. It's like a question about
Great.
questions. Because when you were talking about the difference between the polling versus looking at the mathematics of things, I remember being in university and taking stats class versus calculus. And you can make statistics say whatever you want, right? You're still dealing with numbers, but it's not math, right? You're basically kind of forecasting or plotting. It's formulaic in essence, but not necessarily like mathematics where it goes with nature. Nature informs mathematics, and it's all the same kind of thing. So when you were saying that you knew that you were going to win, even though the polls said otherwise, it's kind of like this idea of humans don't really do a good job of dealing with reality. We like to put this other stuff on top of it when math is really just observation. So my question to you is, when we think about questions, And you were saying how like you got that big mushroom because you just asked. Is there a big question that you've ever asked in a mushroom trip where you were like the response was exactly what you needed? And it's like, and was it in the way that you put the question?
So this is interesting. I was thinking about this before I hopped on today, is that I think that because most people are now conceptualizing what AI is and how to
Mm-hmm.
interface with it through prompting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if we look at the mushroom as NI, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Natural intelligence.
right.
And in the
Mm-hmm.
same way, we can prompt it,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
there's a really interesting meta observation, because if we live with intentionality, the universe responds to that,
That's right. I love that. Ah,
right? So
ah.
this is just like, right, the mushroom just kind of takes that and creates a condensed sort of pocket of time, space time, where that relationship can be seen revealed in the moment,
Oh,
you know? And oftentimes the things that we are kind of the prompt that we are taking in can't be addressed right away until we deal with some other underlying things, because the mushroom's talent is root cause
yeah.
analysis. And if your question is authored at the level of symptom, you might not get back what you thought you were going to get, you know? So I've just been in this a beautiful trust fall with the medicine, that kind of like, allowing these prompts to kind of percolate out of my experience as my field is showing me where my ouchies are, or like, and then I go into this space and kind of get a deeper insight into how the mushroom works as an algorithm.
Mm.
If you want to think about it math wise,
Yeah.
um, and the mastery that this organism has. And that's one of the things that most people aren't celebrating as much as possible, is that this thing knows exactly what to do.
That's
There's
true.
this unfathomable deliberateness. It's not like when a doctor's assessing you and they're trying to figure out what's going on. The mushroom's like right after it.
Already knows the
Yeah.
underlying root cause of everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in the beginning, I think my prompts were a little bit more guided by, this is a medicine, and how that just the scaffolding of that paradigm. And later on in my process, I'd gone to the mushrooms for things that I didn't even know were on the menu.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Like my dog was transitioning, and I had two pretty powerful experiences with her, where I was able to connect with her nervous system and see that we were actually just one giant nervous system experiencing life, and that she had done all kinds of emotional labor on my behalf, and I was actually able to go in a surrogate capacity and co-process for the both of us.
mm.
That's
And I didn't know
beautiful.
that was on the menu.
That's like the warging.
No, right, but people are like, oh, anxiety and depression, oh,
Oh,
anxiety and depression, and
yeah.
meanwhile, like, our anxiety and depression are symptoms that we have forgotten who we are, really. But no one wants to, no one that has the mic right now is talking about those things. Their aperture for context isn't wide enough,
Right. We
you
have to do
know.
a whole new reconsideration of what mental health is with this
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah.
Well, what's mental health in a capitalist society? Like, I the medicine once, or shared with me a few months ago, it does not want to be used as a palliative,
Mm,
which
Mm.
is some brave new world shit. It's like,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
if we work together, we can compost this shit. But you have to really want to go beyond just feeling good enough to go back to work.
mm,
Which is, I think, when most people are like, well, what does healing mean to you?
Mm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like this unspoken thing that is part of it, is like, well, I want to feel good in proximity to the shit show, but I
Totally.
don't want to feel good.
Yeah. I feel like there's that level of you answer that so like I feel like very synchronistically with what like the fall equinox that's here because that whole concept of letting go of everything that doesn't serve you, right? So this idea of we work a job that we hate, we have friends that we don't like, we do these things because what? And it's hurting us, right? And the mushroom will, I've had experiences where you get, hard lessons and you ignore those lessons to your detriment. And it's just, I don't think people are, there's not enough conversation, I think, about journeying being just not a straight line. It's not like you have like they're not like a magic. It's not antidepressants, right? It's not like you're
Well,
going to take the pill and like now I'm happy and now I can go back to work and work the job that I actually hate. So it's so much deeper than that. So thanks for bringing that
yeah,
to the surface.
it's so much deeper than that. I went to the mushroom because I was feeling repressed once, and after 4 journeys, because I had to peel back the layers, the mushroom was like, "You're repressed because everyone else is. Like
And you're attached to the collective, so
well, your mind was colonized before you were born."
Mm,
And I was like, "Whoa." So I've been really honored to take on my intergenerational predicament and really compost it. This is like a quick observation. So, do we know why we celebrate St. Patrick's Day? Do you know why we
to drink green
celebrate?
beer.
Yeah, do you know why we get shit faced?
Wasn't it well, I mean, the story goes there was some was that the snakes leading out of the
Yeah, so
Oh, the
I
snakes.
went to Ireland, and they're like, "Yeah, there were never any snakes here. It's too cold." So what we're
Who
celebrating
told
is
that story?
the Catholics, but
Yeah, there's that.
so what they were talking about was the indigenous.
Mm.
Mm.
So we celebrate St. Patrick's suppression of the indigenous. And one of
Yeah.
my DNA strands is druidic. And other than maybe some tribal trauma that I picked up along the way, do you know
I
how many
definitely feel druid off you. Like,
green man,
yeah,
right? Haha.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Oh my gosh.
so do you know how many generations ago that was?
It's hard to
Just pick a number.
10.
10 million.
79. So 70, just from that strand of DNA, I have 79 generations of shit to work on.
Wow.
So when we look at each of these experiences as a drop, we don't know how big the bucket is.
Mhm.
And I'm sure a lot of that was like inherited, and reiterated and whatnot. But I think a lot about the collective like load that we have to compost.
Hmm.
So yeah, the just as a brief passing or closing thought, like I think the only way we can actually handle this workload is to do it in a tribal way. It's where
Mhm.
we show up for each other.
Right.
And maybe we all won't make, $200 an hour holding space for somebody, but I don't think it can work. I don't think it's sustainable any other way.
Mhm. Mhm. Wow, what a wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much, Travis. I want to sort of open it up, Rachel, and I don't know if you had anything else there that you wanted to add, but
Oh no,
I
that
want to
was
kind of,
perfect. I feel like this show is like perfect, like cosmic timing wise.
yeah,
This
exactly.
is these stories are hitting, I think, at a time where people need to hear it.
Exactly. And Travis, how can people find you? Where can they learn more about growing mushrooms with you?
Oh, well,
How
they
can
nixed me off of
people-
Instagram. And
Yeah,
Oh
may I got the
no.
kibosh.
talk
But you
about
know
meta.
what?
We're talking about
Oh
meta. Here's
man.
another bed
It's a
meta
rite of
here.
But
passage, I think.
well, I learned a few things since being off of Instagram is number one, they don't want me there. So the
Mhm.
only way I can exist in that space is redacted.
Mhm.
Mm.
And the other thing is, with the algorithms poisoning us essentially and taking away our ability to think for ourselves, like I was asking people to hang out with me and talk about profound things, almost like a asking my sober friends to come hang out with me in a bar.
Right.
So they didn't get they I'm still on Facebook, so you can find me on Facebook. Travis Tyler Fluck. And I'm definitely interested in creating like a website where I don't have to be redacted. So that's like in the works. Um, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to chat with you. I always enjoy it. We'll definitely have you on for another show in the future. I think there were so many little areas that we could have sort of journeyed down that we didn't journey down that would have been really exciting for the conversation and for everyone to listen to, but also just in terms of just unpacking what it is that we're all talking
Oh,
about here, right? So,
yeah. Well, I want to come out to Oakland.
yeah, that sounds great.
So I think there'd be a cool opportunity to do like a and Oakland could be like the first stop on the bigger tour I mentioned about just seeing what's going on,
Yeah,
because we were the first two.
right.
Hmm.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Well, looking forward to that. Please let me know when you come out here and when you're ready to start that. I think this is a really great opportunity to sort of galvanize that community that's out there. The pendulum has been swinging kind of in weird directions on the federal level. People are uncertain. It's unstable right now. So as we said, right when the pandemic happened, what does nature do? This is what we asked ourselves. When it's a difficult and troubling time, we don't fruit, we fix our roots. And so
Yep.
this is a time to get back into the roots again, really sort of make sure that everyone has all the resources they need, whether it be sort of how to talk about this, how to sort of learn how to cultivate, how to connect with the community, what's going on, sort of heartstorming, brainstorming, all that kind of visioning that we can do. I think this is a good time to be doing it because the stronger we are on the base level and the grassroots level, the more fruits we can bear, and also the more opportunities that we can avoid the sort of the insects or the pests of sometimes what might be even feel like allies, like the new approach packs, the deep pockets out there that are doing what they can to sort of to limit or slow down. I like the term slow abolitionists, right? Slow down, everybody. Although we also, to some degree, are saying that, and making sure that it doesn't go into sort of corporate, sort of consumer based mentality, but really finding ways to make sure that all the different communities out there have what they need to have, so they don't get influenced by the only story they're hearing, which is unfortunately that big platform, that big voice that sometimes comes through from these deeper pockets. So knowing it comes from integrity, knowing it comes from community, knowing it comes from good people, I think is really going to help us in the long run, if we think really long term of this movement here. And I'm really excited to
Yeah.
have you on board with that.
And one last thing, I keep saying that, but the embodiment part,
Hmm.
like that's where they can't fuck with us.
Right.
I was listening to Ram Dass this morning, and someone said something like, when I talk about Buddha, everybody pushes back on me, but when I am Buddha, everybody,
Hmm.
sees that.
Hmm.
I love that.
That's Well, another great conversation. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Rachel. This has been such a pleasure. A reminder, everybody, we are going live every 2 weeks. Next 2 weeks on the next Sunday, we might actually be switching that to a Saturday. So keep that in mind. I'll kind of, either check in on the Saturday at the same time or Sunday. If not, we'll be continuing to do it on the following Sunday after that. We're going to be putting up some clips pretty soon on social media. We've also had some challenges with Meta, but luckily, every time that we've put our reclaim in there, they've given it back to us, which is surprising. And knock on wood, it's a good sign. But maybe we don't know how long that'll be. So always keep in mind that we do have our website at decriminializenature.org. Find us there. Find us on our Spotify. Find us on our YouTube channel live. We're putting this podcast out next Sunday or just shortly after that. And really, really excited to continue this conversation in the future. Happy fall equinox, happy 920, happy lunar eclipse or solar eclipse that's happening. And really looking forward to the incredible fall. Hope your mushrooms grow well if you're growing any outside or you're picking them or finding them out there. And yeah, just pumped to be here and to have you all on board. So once again, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, everyone out there, for listening. Until next time, tune in, stay rooted, and let's grow together. Have a great day. Happy Sunday.
Thanks.
Bye.